Okay, it looks like we are now set. Welcome back, everybody. This is the start of our 2018 Summer of Code. We try and do this every year, or at least I've been trying to teach this every year to make sure that we have the basic building blocks firmly locked away in our brains and in our toolboxes and in our capabilities to do the work we need to do when it comes to extending WordPress, working with WordPress, building sites for clients, customizing solutions. And so the four major building blocks, there's really a fifth one that's starting to happen, but we're still a ways out before the, quote, general public needs to know it. But the four major building blocks are, one, HTML, which we're going to talk about today, CSS, which is tomorrow, PHP, which we're going to talk about on Wednesday, and then jQuery, a JavaScript language library that we're going to talk about on Thursday. And on the Thursday session, we'll also talk about other things that we may want to know about. So just a few logistical items every day this week, Monday through Thursday. It's at noon that we start. And there should be a handout every single day. The chat room is always going to be at WPStudio.com/chat. And as long as that is all set, you are good to go. All right. So let's talk about some of the differences, because some of you have been here for last year's Code Camp HTML when we talked about the overview of HTML. We're going to be spending a bit more time this time during our Summer of Code 2018 relating why it is important that we know the ins and outs, the elements of HTML as it relates to WordPress. So throughout today's session is a little bit of a shorter session than the other ones this week. Yes, we're going to focus on HTML, but it is going to be in relationship to WordPress. So at any time, if this is the first time you've ever attended a session here at WP Studio, feel free to ask questions there in the chat room at WPStudio.com/chat. And I am following that chat room while instructing. So in order for us to do everything, we're going to be using just kind of what we'll call our blackboard here, where all of our code will occur in front of us. We'll do live coding, live conversations. So when we are dealing with a HTML in relationship to a WordPress site, most of the time we are not actually building pure HTML sites. We're not building things where we have to get the doc type correctly and then everything must format into, whether it's a strict one or a transitional or a frame set. Because if you look at any traditional doc type or HTML documents, normally there is going to be a line that occurs above the HTML tag. The HTML tag opens up the document for the browser to know that whatever is contained within these walls, the brackets, is going to be HTML. But every HTML document must have a doc type that tells the browsers what it needs to do. So in order for me to at least set the stage, we need to talk about the different types of doc types. Because if you're looking at all these type of things, you may see doc types that have just a very simple thing called HTML. You may see doc type HTML. What this actually means is it's actually doc type HTML5. So that everything within HTML5 would be validated against the rules, the allowed tags, the elements that you could use according to the HTML5 agreed upon standards. To give you a quick example, if you have a doc type HTML right here, And all you'd have to do is go look at any of your WordPress themes, look at the header.php file, and you'll be able to see what type of doc type that theme is built using. Just about every current WordPress theme is going to have this doc type HTML, meaning it wants to be HTML5 compliant, is going to be here. But if you look at older ones, you may see things like HTML4 strict or HTML 1.0 frame set or XHTML. There's a number of different doc types. But let's talk about the reason why this is important. Again, validation is very important. But if you have doc type HTML saying everything should validate inside here, should validate to HTML5, anything in a blink tag, is not going to validate properly because the blink tag has been deprecated and is no longer supported in HTML5. Now, it may work on some older browsers, but if you try and run your site through a validation system, that is why it will break. It will say it is not valid because all the validation's based on the doc type. So knowing this, it could allow you to fix older WordPress themes. Maybe you looked at let's say you looked at an older HTML. Let's do this. I'm going to give you just an example. Let's do this one. I'm going to paste one in here. So you may be looking at your doc type of an old WordPress theme. Or maybe you have a potential client who wants you to transition their current HTML site to a WordPress site. And so you're thinking, well, I've seen classes and I've attended training on how I can convert an HTML site to a WordPress theme, taking over the little bits, and I'm just going to copy and paste things into the header, into the footer, add in the content area. And if you were to do this, and you just pasted in an old thing, or you looked at an old site and you saw XHTML 1.0 strict, well, when we see this, it's going to have some issues. Because this will not allow, there's several things it will not allow. It will not allow frame sets. It will not allow fonts to be put into the HTML. How many of you remember this one? When we had our body, normally we would have like a header area, and we'll talk about this in just a moment, and then we'd have a body area. How many of you remember doing this? Font equals something like this. You'd actually put this stuff directly into the HTML tag. If you've been doing if you've been doing any type of web development for a long time, really before we started using CSS. Now, BG, that font family, that's CSS. We used to actually do the old ways where you would actually put in the font here. Maybe you would put in a font size directly into an HTML tag, like the body tag. Well, if you did this, XHTML does not allow frame sets. There are some old WordPress themes that are still in the WordPress repository that use frame sets. But if you somehow copied over the XHTML strict says everything must have valid XML markup, meaning you must have an open and close for everything. You could not do this, an image source blah.jpg. This would not be a valid XML markup because there is no closing tag for an image tag. So this would not validate. We would have to go back in, and we'll talk about this in just a moment, and close it in order to have an XML markup validate. But with the strict settings, Yeah, frame sets are not allowed. Presentational or deprecated elements. Anything that's been deprecated, blink tags, all those things would not validate. And so, yes, we have things from HTML4, XML, XHTML1. Here's another one that, and you can read a bunch of those things in the handouts. The final thing I'm going to say about this doc type is if you ever get something that would look like, and I think it's XHTML 1.1. Actually, let's do this. If we just used XHTML 1.0 and you were trying to make a website that has East Asian language, like a script language that we would see in Japan, Korea, any of those type of, looks like almost a handwritten, scripted language, you could not get it to render in any browser if you were using XHTML 1.0. If your doc type was here, the browser is actually going to say, well, I can't render any East Asian languages. So what we'd have to do is either go completely to HTML5, which this is always the preferred way to go now, or you'd have to go to another doc type that would allow you to do this. So when it comes to WordPress, if for some reason you know you're trying to put a frame set or putting in an iframe and it's not working, check the doc type. It could be that there is an old doc type version which is preventing something. If you are building a site that should have language translations and for some reason all you're getting are these square blocks showing up, check the doc type. It's entirely possible that the HTML, the structure of your site, is not supporting the ability to use those type of East Asian languages. That is why it is important to understand the differences, and I wrote them all out for you in the handout, why doc types, even with WordPress, are important. Any questions about doc type before we go on? Oh, one other thing, because this always comes up, you can always change a doc type. Just means then you'd have to make sure you check all the other HTML on that site to make sure it validates with the proper doc type that you are choosing. Now, how many of you go way back to using things like WordStar or the early versions of WordPerfect or Star Writer? Anybody remember those days? Well, each one of those had an alert to the screen that you would be looking in, and that would tell them that this is a WordPerfect document. This is a WordStar document. And therefore, we are going, and that's what the doc type is. It's alerting them to what type of document program, because each of those had certain tags that you would wrap around. If, for those of you who may be too young, you may not realize that the early word processors, if required us to actually type a command or alert it that we're going to bold something, or we're going to italicize this, we would literally be putting tags or commands in front and at the end of it. Very much like HTML. But that's what the doc type is doing. It is alerting whatever is going to render, for the case of our WordPress development, the website, the browser. That's what's happening. All right. So in HTML, once we alert the browser to what type of document we're using, which is HTML5, everything contained within HTML is going to be the full HTML document. And there are two sections. There's the head section and there's the body section. Just as a reminder, not visible, visible. Let me say that again. Not visible, visible. Now, why is this important with WordPress? Now, just because this is an HTML thing, I'm going to throw in some PHP/WordPress issues. In the head, at the very beginning, is a hook. In the head section of every WordPress theme's HTML structure is a hook, a WordPress hook called WP head. We can put anything in there. And yes, in a lot of classes where we're demonstrating action hooks in WordPress, we'll use that because it is a known hook. Everybody knows about it. And we could add text and information that will always show up at the top of the browser page. If you do that, it will not validate. Why? Because this should be not visible on the browser. Everything that you want visible in the browser and to validate must stay within the body tag. So I put this as an illustration. Just because you can put something into the head section that will render on the browser using WordPress does not mean you should do that. If your theme that you are using does not have a hook that occurs immediately after the body tag, you either need to add it there yourself by adding a hook, or you need to look for another theme. If the theme is trying to get you to use the WP head to put visual elements onto your WordPress site, do not do that, because when it comes to HTML, invisible, visible. Everything that goes in the head is information that we are passing to the browser. The things of linking to style sheets, linking to JavaScript, linking to the titles, or giving information about meta information, about the site, about the page. Viewport information for how we should render this on a mobile device. All that stuff, instructions go in the head. The body is where we are delivering the elements. All right. So, any questions about this? This is a bad habit that many WordPress developers use because they know the WP head hook is there, so don't use it unless you're actually adding code or things that need to go into the head section of your HTML document. So again, remember that HTML is not a programming language, it's a markup language. So like we were talking about in the chat room and everything, it's like the early versions of word processor programs where we would mark up the document, which would describe how we want the document to appear on the visual end, or how it's printed out, or how it displays on the screen. HTML contains markup tags. So markup tags, they describe and define the contents within. So everything in the body tag appears there. Almost all markup tags come in pairs. An opening and a closing. You see an opening HTML, a closing HTML, an opening head, a closing head. When we see other tags, like some divs that may be, you'll always see a div that opens and closes. But we may see some things like in the form element. So if we had a form that we were building in HTML, we may see an input tag, an input markup tag that is saying, hey, this is going to be a text field that doesn't have a value yet. And many times you'll see just this. An input does not need, you don't need a closing input field, because all HTML tags need to describe and define this, what is inside the tag. And so if an element, an HTML tag, and a markup tag does not need to contain anything or wrap around something, we do not need to close it. If it needs to describe that there is a division in this area, or there is a paragraph that begins and ends here, so we've defined that there's a paragraph that's going to begin and end here. But an input tag doesn't need this. So therefore, you technically don't need anything. But you will see many people still doing a closing that is self-contained inside the element. This goes back to XHTML. It even goes back to HTML4. It is not required in HTML5, but it would still validate fine. What this is saying is the concept of HTML, there must always be an opening and a closing. If it doesn't need a wrapping element, we're just going to close it inside. That's also why you will see, rather than people using a break, the line break, you will still see this in the code. Both are still valid. But that's where it comes from. And it comes from that concept that we need an opening and a closing element. Now, quick reminder. HTML tags are not case sensitive, but you should only use lowercase. If you remember way back in the days, there was an HTML editor for Windows called Hotdog. Hotdog turned everything into capital. It just ran block quote. And you would look at all the markup tags and they would all be uppercase. So if you actually come across an old website or a client wants to transfer something, or maybe it's something you did a long time ago that you used an application, some of the early applications made the tags all capitalized. They're not case sensitive. The ideas will still work, but going forward, you should not capitalize them. Keep it lowercase. Now, you may have heard me mention things like HTML tags and HTML elements. They are basically the same terminology. When we do some CSS stuff tomorrow, we'll throw in a slightly different terminology. But the HTML elements, HTML tags are basically the same thing. Most people today are not going to be using the word tags. Most people will refer to all of these as HTML elements. If it is part of core HTML, it is an HTML element. This is an HTML element, HTML element, HTML element. Yes, they are HTML tags. But when we start using CSS tomorrow, you're going to see that we have HTML elements, we have other elements that we are, assigning styles to. And so when the reference to an HTML element is the core tag that's part of WordPress. So keep that in the back of your mind. All right. Now when it comes to WordPress, here are the tricks when it comes to looking at how can you manage and why is something not looking properly. So if we were to take a look, and I'm going to get rid of this. So we've got our HTML page, and so this is mainly what we would be doing with our theme, or maybe we're in the WordPress editor, or maybe we're creating a template file and we're laying stuff out. Our paragraph tag is simply going to treat, Why didn't it let me do this? Let me just... Why isn't it let me preview this? Oh, let's just add this in. Hold on. So I'm trying to go back and forth, and so no. Startertheme.com test html.html. Okay, there. I was trying to use the coda to show you going back and forth between the preview. Okay, so here's our preview. If you're looking at this paragraph tag, and let's say you have a few paragraph tags, in WordPress, you may not be looking at exactly... oh, I need to save this. Sorry. Save. Preview. You may not be looking at something that is nicely laid out with even space between the top and the bottom of the paragraph and the beginning. You may actually see things that have lines in them, underscores, wrappers. There may be other styles. So just because you have a paragraph tag does not mean it's going to be treated normally. Always look at the CSS, which we'll deal with tomorrow. Now, I start bringing this up here because I can't tell you the times I see people go to a WordPress website, they type a header 1, header 2, we'll just keep going, header 3, you can only go to header 6, you cannot go beyond that, because a header 7 and beyond does not actually exist. Header 5 and a header 6. Then they go look at their WordPress site on the same, and they're like, why? And what normally would happen with most WordPress sites, header 4 may be bigger than header 1. Header 5 may be in a different color and underlined. So get to know your theme. Why is this an important thing to do? Because I'm going to pull up our WordPress website, and I want to teach you a tiny little trick when working with maybe a new theme you may not be as familiar with. And in order for me to do that, I'm going to go find just some random theme in the WordPress repository, and hopefully we won't break everything. Okay, so I'm going to bring over our themes. Bear with me one second. All right, okay, so we're going to come over here. We're going to add a new theme. Let's find a popular theme. I'm trying to find one that, let's do a latest one. Sometimes those have some of the more stranger things that have happened. Okay, so let's grab... I'm looking for more of a blog one. Okay, well, I have no idea what this is going to look like. Let's grab this one. All right, so we're going to activate this theme. I have no idea what's going to happen. I haven't even checked this one. And this is where I would encourage you to come over here, and we're going to go test HTML. If you're unfamiliar with the theme, I want you to just do this. Create a page, a WordPress page, and go over to the text, because we're going to just do HTML. I want you to type in a paragraph tag. And then you're going to normally do something, and I'm going to just grab a lorem ipsum. My coda will create that automatically. So we'll just create a lorem ipsum. Then I want you to create the header 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're going to create a visual so that we can know and be alerted before we start developing the site what's really going on. Now, If you want, you can sit there and read through their entire style sheets. But it's going to be easier for you if you simply take default HTML here. Hit update, view, and immediately we're going to see, hopefully, okay, there's nothing untoward. We're having exactly what we expect from this theme. But I'm going to tell you, some of you may do this and you're going to have themes that have things that are way off the beaten path. And this next one is where we see our problem, and that's the lists. If you are running in your HTML and you want to create a list, we have two options. We have an unordered list, which should, by default, give us bullet points. Should. So we'll do a list item, list 1, list 2, list 3. Okay? But you also want to check it against the ordered list, which should give us, by default, by using just HTML, it should give us a 1, 2, 3 ordered item. But you will be surprised at how many WordPress themes don't. They will look at this and I wish that wouldn't do that. Hold on, I'm trying to get it so it looks a little formatted better, but let's just get rid of the spacing. Whoops. This is one of the problems with the WordPress editor. Working HTML directly in here, it doesn't have nice markup, and it does have issues. So when we update this, then we go take a look at this item. Luckily, we are okay. But if we were to go change this to another theme, I'm going to tell you these ordered lists many times lose their numbering. There are other times I have seen unordered lists not even have the bullet point next to it. And it gets frustrating if you're used to using HTML to create a structured element like lists, only to say, this is a list, it should do this. Well, it's because their CSS has removed default stuff. In order to prevent you from pulling your hair out, I would encourage you to create a page, and maybe you just add this to any of your WordPress sites that you're developing for clients. Create a test HTML page with all the elements that you're going to use. And you can use the handout to walk you through all the items of link tags, image tags, add in attributes, comments. Go through the text elements. And so what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to list and we're going to talk about the different elements in addition to this, and then you will all have a finished version that I will give you in the replay page. So we've got paragraphs, we've got header tags, unordered lists. Now let's start talking about the different types of elements. And I'm going to add them in to the different areas. So when we talk about elements, it is important to remember that HTML serves a major function in all websites. Doesn't matter if you're using JavaScript. It doesn't matter if you're using, some random weird Go, Django language that will render things. Everything for a browser must be rendered down to a HTML document. even though WordPress is all PHP that does the rendering, what it renders or creates is an HTML document. So, HTML is structure. HTML is required knowledge so that you can know how to put information out when customizing the loop, customizing the template. So, there are different types of elements, the tags, the elements that we have. There is a paragraph tag. There is a break tag. Break tag is simply that carriage return from the typewriter. It makes sure that whatever is happening here will automatically go to another line. Add a line space, a carriage return. That's why you may also see some themes having 2 or 3 breaks, or maybe you've got, because they need that many spaces because of other information, content that's being added dynamically. The difference between a break tag and an HR tag, or HR tag, is that an HR is a horizontal line. A horizontal line by default in HTML, without any code, customization, anything, is going to go almost 100% across the way. It never goes 100% across the entire browser because of the way the HR tag works. Barbara, yes, I may be using terms like carriage returns that nobody knows about. But think about if you watch the old Alfred Hitchcock, he's writing on the typewriter and he needs the paper to go back to the other side. You must press the thing over to you're pressing it from the right to the left, and by pressing that little metal bar, you're actually making the paper go up a little bit so you can begin typing the next line. That's what a carriage return. You're returning the carriage that's holding the piece of paper. Okay, with the HR tag, check this out. There are way too many themes that have already styled all your HR tags. Maybe they're only going 70% across. Maybe they actually have added in a shadow. Maybe they made the size a little bit bigger. Know this before you get into too much of your content development, because the WordPress editor is going to insert these tags and everything as you begin editing and adding items and adding horizontal tags. It's going to add that stuff for you. Example. So here we could have a horizontal line. We could have the unordered list. We could have the ordered list. But if you don't know what it looks like going forward on the theme, you may be pulling your hair out or setting yourself up for failure in terms of the structure of your site. So the final text element that you want to test out is a pre-tag. The reason why we want to test out our pre-tag is most themes have also pre-styled this, and so it's a pre-formatted. What should happen with a pre-tag is that in HTML it will show up as it looks like computer code, but that means it's the same. Every single letter occupies the exact same space. If you look at this, the S occupies less space than the M. See how you can actually see more? The I only occupies that much space. Yet the M occupies this much space. Well, if we come down over here and we highlight the I, it's taking that much space. The M is taking the exact amount of space. So anything that is in that pre-tag has a preset look. So those are text elements, part of HTML. There are logical styles, and this is where we get into HTML debates. because there is logic and there is physical stylings. Most of us, if we're used to typing out a Word document or something else, we know that we want to bold something and we may want to italicize something. Italic stuff. These are physical styles. They are styles that will render on the browser. It will render on a printout. But remember that there are search engines out there. They're not looking for physical styles. They are looking for logical styles. They are looking for things that you are putting emphasis on in code. So most search engines, if you see bold, italic, that is not providing a logical style, it's a physical style, and therefore, according to everything I have read, bold and italic is not going to provide to the search engine emphasis in saying this is important. That's why most web developers are going to use an emphasized text, looks like italic, and that EM, emphasized, is a logical style. If I want to say that this is a strong statement, I'm using a strong tag. This looks like bold. But it is a logical style. And rather than using a pre-tag, which is more of a physical element, I'm telling the search engines code. This is like a pre-tag. So if you are used to using italic, bold, or pre, now there are reasons to use a pre-tag versus a code tag, but if all we're talking for is we're inside our Word editor, our WordPress editor, we're creating a blog post, a page, we should be focusing more on this, because it does do the visual representation of italic and bold, but it is communicating a logical structure to the search engines so that they know this is emphasized, this is a strong point we're making. So when we're developing for the web, yes, this is basics for HTML, but get away from doing this and more into this. Any questions on physical versus logical styles? Okay. Let me make sure I've got... Okay. We are going to dive into some more of this in tomorrow's CSS, because when we talk about link tags or anchor tags, where we're linking to anything, and this would link to Google. Again, it's a wrapping tag, so we have an open HTML element here. It is vitally important we understand about how to add attributes and why it is important to add attributes, and things like an a title tag, and then things like an there's a whole bunch of attributes. We're going to actually talk about this tomorrow, but I didn't want to put this out because when we deal with our CSS, we're able to target styles to apply to HTML elements based on their attributes. So if an href goes to this location, we can style it differently. When we start looking at an image tag and we have a source of an image tag based on the source or based on the special image alternative text, based on those type of things, these are attributes that are buried within an HTML element that not only instruct that HTML element what to do, go find the source of this image and display it as this tag, provide alternative text so that search engines can know what this image is about. But in our CSS, we can use these because you may have a number of links on a page. You may have a number of images on a page. Have the attributes. They show up in green on Coda. Have those things there so that as you develop, you can target. If they're not there when you're building the site or you're building out the content of a home page or you're editing the structure of the theme, if they're not there, you can't target them because CSS, now we can target it with jQuery, but CSS does not have the ability for us to go find the third image on the second page. CSS doesn't have that capability. We can do it with jQuery, but what we're wanting to do is make our life easy to style by making sure we include all the attributes, even if you're not used to it. So take a look at the handout. We'll do more with this tomorrow. Always include attributes. What that means for WordPress users, if we're going to add an image, okay, I'm going to add an image. Let's grab an, I don't have an image. Well, let's just grab that file. Great. Fill out the caption, fill out the description, fill out all these items. I'm just showing you why. Because then when it inserts it in the page and we begin looking at the HTML, well, that's weird. It didn't actually... Don't you love it when WordPress doesn't do what it's supposed to do? So somebody broke the editor in WordPress because it used to auto-insert all of those things as alt tags and everything else. I didn't need to save it yet because it didn't actually come over. So because of this is now even more vitally important. I didn't realize this, that now we would need to put in title tags and put in other attributes in order to make sure that anything we are using in this editor is coming over. Wonder if it's because it was an anchor and not an image link. I'll dive into that, but it should have actually brought over that caption and the other information. Okay. It means it never even put it there. It used to. So I'm going to submit a bug report to WordPress. All right. One more thing on this item. And it's too often we get stuck in creating lists. And we do this things, and most of us is we do the second nature. Where, let's say we would have a statement, and then we want to describe that statement. So instead of this, we'll do another unordered list because we want to do list item, statement. Let's do this. Statement support 1. Statement support to close that. Okay, so see what we've now done, and let me save this and we'll take a preview. So what we've done here is now we have a statement and then we have supports. So we just start thinking of it like a great outline system. If you are doing that for a website that is going online that you are wanting the search engines to look at, index, pass information on, get it searchable, this is not the way to do it. Because unordered lists or ordered lists simply tell search engines this is simply a list of information. This does not say this is part of this. That's where we use definition lists. It may look exactly like a unordered list, but when we use a definition list, we will have a definition term, statement, and then under that, we are going to have a statement support. Every time you have a definition statement support. Now, when we go take a look at this, it's going to just look like a unordered list without the bullet points. But when it comes to search engines looking at it, because it's looking at the HTML, which is describing the structure, and go back to one of the very first things I said today, markup tags in HTML are used to describe and define the contents within. This is excellent for SEO. Why? Because now this is tied to the term. So when we begin to talk about information, rather than using unordered list, we can talk about HTML structure, and then we can talk about definitions and examples. A search engine is going to look at that and say, definitions and examples are part of or describing or a part of this HTML structure term. So what we have is a definition list, definition term, and then the definition. It allows us to create a list that this is a perfect thing for FAQs, because you may write out the answer and then you may have a question. Rather than simply putting it in a paragraph form, what we can do is, why is HTML so important? Because it defines the structure of a site. We may be thinking this is going to be horrible for SEO. Well, because the search engines understand structure, it knows that this basically is now tied to this question. And on the front end, it's going to simply look like, and again, we can style these with CSS. We can make this look big. We can make it have an indentation and a bullet point if that's what you want. But it comes back to kind of why I'm hammering home with this. These are based, HTML is a basic. It's been around for a long, long time. When it comes to our web development, we need to be working on logical things. Emphasize strong code, not bold italic. Not the physical. If we just need to list items, great. We can use the tried and true unordered lists and the ordered lists. But if there is any type of FAQ system, if there's any type of support questions, any type of vocabulary, literally vocabulary definitions, like if you are building something for a client who needs to have a support page for all their clients, where so they understand the definitions from something. You've got to do it in this item, and it's going to help your searchability as well as authority in terms of what this is. Now, part of the other reason why this is important, if you've been around or will be around a lot here at WPStudio, you'll know we use pods a lot. We use tools that, even we've got here in the community, like WPStudio, where we can choose how to render out content that we are querying. If you have built a frequently asked questions or something like this pod, custom post type, where you're adding things, and then you have a query or a pod template that is going to display each of those items, don't put it in a header 2 of the question and then a paragraph tag of the answer. Put it in something like this, where the definition list is at the top and then you have a term and a definition. It's just, Steve, yeah, the semantic web is, yes, it's part of the HTML5. It's also part of the idea of using HTML elements that we're not going to really talk about, but we have things that, again, HTML, I'm just going to type this out. It's in the first, I believe it's in the second page of your handout. I'm going to just type it right here. The markup tags are used to describe and define the contents within. Well, if that is kind of one of the basics understanding of HTML, when we see HTML5 elements like article, aside, figure, footer, header, nav, section, hold on. So I'm jumping around here. Let me get rid of this. I don't know why I have the double body tag. Section, time, summary. All these describe what is going to occur in between these HTML tags, because they describe and define the contents within. Semantic being more of a description of what the structure is looking like. Now, different people will say different things about what semantic markup is, but basically it is a more descriptive method of describing what is being marked up, aka HTML5 stuff. You do not have to have these things in order to be HTML5 compliant, but these are just additional tags that provide better description of what is being wrapped inside. Many of the WordPress sites now, themes, you'll see article wrapped around blog posts. Why? Because that is actually what is being wrapped around. You will see an actual footer tag wrapped around the footer elements. You will see a nav tag wrapped around WordPress navigation. Doesn't mean you will always see it, or doesn't mean you have to use it, but it is a descriptive tag. And in the same way, search engines can see definition lists and treat them differently than ordered or unordered lists, it will treat things that have HTML tags that are descriptive differently than simply just having a header tag and a paragraph tag. If you are looking at your HTML, if you're looking at your website, looking at the source code, and you don't see anything like this, any of these items, sections, nav, not that you have to see every one of them, but if you don't see an article, you don't see a nav, and you're wondering, is this why some of my SEO is going down? Well, there's a good chance it probably is, because search engines want you to be descriptive of the content and make it easy for the search engines to figure out what is going on. So, knowing and being very comfortable going in and out of when you should use logical language and physical tags is all allowing us for theme customization, WordPress, loop manipulation, right, using the HTML widget box properly in WordPress. So, if you want any homework, I would take a look at the handout, and if you see any element that you are not as familiar with, go look it up. Make sure you know what those elements are or how they operate. Because knowing the core structure of HTML is going to help you out. Now, we had to have this out of the way so that we could have a structure of a site going forward in order for us to deal with CSS tomorrow and deal with PHP on Wednesday and then deal with jQuery on Thursday. If you don't have that base of HTML, none of the other things actually work. PHP has to use HTML to build information that it generates. jQuery has to have HTML in order to look through the document. CSS has to have HTML in order to know what to style. So stay on the lookout for the email that's coming out later today, information about the rest of the week, as well as a really cool thing that's coming. Marianne, yeah, jQuery is JavaScript. And the reason why we're still focusing on jQuery is that core JavaScript is not something anybody is going to be using by default unless they're actually developing stuff for WordPress. We are still years away from average users or even average developers using core JavaScript. Why? Because WordPress is still a PHP-powered language, content management system. WordPress is not a JavaScript language managed content management system, even though there are some script kiddies out there who think it should be. Barbara, your question depends on the FAQ plugin. There are many out there that do use the definition list. Many of them may also give you the choice of what to use. All right. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Find me in the Slack channel, and I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great rest of the day, and take care.